Welcome back. As the country reels from the attack on the Capitol that led to President Trump's second impeachment, social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have been trying to crack down on far-right extremists, ridding mainstream social media of the falsehood that the election was stolen from President Trump, or the conspiracy-fueled QAnon content, or blocking major activity from major accounts like Twitter did to the president, or even removing whole sites like Amazon did to Parler, are some steps toward combating the growing scourge of online extremism in this country. But the alarming reality is that some of the forces behind that content and behind the current unrest have been brewing for years. So even if you can't see it on mainstream social media sites, it doesn't mean the movement's gone away. The concern is that it's just further underground. NBC News reporter Ben Collins has been doing some very important work following these online groups for us, and he joins us now. Ben, you and your colleague Brandy have become household names for all of our viewers, and I know I personally am grateful that you do this job because we were just talking in the break that my producer and I don't think we could do it, that we could stomach seeing every day what you see. But here's what I want to ask you about in terms of what happens next here. If these movements are forced further underground, does that limit the exposure of and the conversion of new people to this? How important is it that they are removed from mainstream platforms? I mean, is that still an important step? And then we'll talk about what they're saying and doing on these new platforms in a second.
Sure. You know, it's a double-edged sword. These groups go deeper down into these smaller social networks or just websites now, forums, where they are completely in an echo chamber, driving each other into further and further into this radicalization cycle. And that's where it gets kind of dangerous. You know, these people are not as heavily scrutinized. They can't be checked by people, regular people. If they were on Facebook saying this stuff, maybe somebody would disagree with them. But now they are just egging each other on to commit attacks, and that's the dangerous part. But, you know, since they are off Facebook and since they were off YouTube, it kind of limits their ability to recruit. You know, I was just reading a little bit about one of the people who was in the Capitol on the vice president's chair last week, and she was a school therapist. A lot of people make fun of this guy, the QAnon shaman, who, you know, he was arrested, and now he's in a jail, and he's on a hunger strike until he gets organic food. Yeah. The guy with the antlers, right? And a lot of people are like, how can that possibly, like, this guy is into organic food, and yet here he is trying to overthrow the government, all this stuff. It's very conceivable because of how the algorithms worked in the last couple of years, where if you were into extreme movements, or if you're into just like, you know, regular but alternative movements, like wellness movements, into crystals, into alternative diets, you know, Facebook and YouTube would drive you down further and further down these paths. And then eventually you're in a QAnon group and you think that the government is being run by pedophiles. So none of this stuff was really surprising to me when I saw these people come out. These are people who are otherwise members of society who have, you know, maybe one weird kink in their personality. And social media really exploited that. And that's in part how a lot of these people ended up at the Capitol last week.
That is so terrifying. I saw that you posted a thread on Twitter about how to talk to people that are taking steps toward this, because I do think people, as this has been something that has roiled the country, everyone's paying attention. I know I've certainly talked to people who say, oh my God, my high school friend or ex-boyfriend or you know, sorority sister is posting on Facebook that they went to a rally like this, or they put it on social media somehow, and I had no idea. How could this be? How do we talk to the people in our lives about this? I mean, what are the signs to look for? And at what point do you think people are past being rehabilitated from something like this?
Yeah, the really strange part of this right now is that there are not a lot of success stories of people who come out of QAnon. Like, we're talking, you know, a handful of people who have been public about getting to the other side of it. When we're talking about de-radicalizing people, once you're all the way in, you're pretty much, you're gone. It's very hard to get people out of it. So you can't give an inch to white supremacists. These people need to be prosecuted. They need to be brought to justice because they are not finding their way out. But there are people on the path. If somebody is sending you a flat Earth video or something, you know, silly on the internet, they can, you know, just step in right now. You can kind of stop it if you want.
So Ben, I do have to ask you, what are we seeing people say on these new, deeper, darker channels about what they're planning for the next week?
There were two major things, right? So one of the only positive things that happened last week is that a lot of people hit a line where they just do not accept that violence was necessary. So either they're blaming Antifa or they're off the movement. But militia movements have gotten even more extreme. They've sort of kicked out a bunch of QAnon people who think that everything is still sort of going according to plan and Donald Trump will still be president on the 21st. They realize that Donald Trump is no longer their savior, but they still want to overthrow the government. And that's what's happening in these militia movements, in these private chat groups, where they're talking about actionable steps to do that. They were talking about actionable steps to commit terror attacks. So that's the worry. Those people are in much more private spaces. They're in hiding, but they are, their urgency here has really ramped up.
Yeah, it's all terrifying. And you could, in some ways, tell the difference in the crowd at the Capitol, whether you were looking at the pictures or whether you were on the ground. There were clearly people that were, in some ways, almost tourists in the movement and just kind of looking around. And then there were others that clearly had pretty significant and very scary plans. Ben Collins, thank you so much for bringing all this to us, and stay safe out there, my friend. Meanwhile, stay